The year was 1942, and the German military machine, having conquered half a continent, now faced the brutal reality of a protracted global war. The vast industries of the Reich required an endless stream of raw materials and, increasingly, an endless supply of forced labor. Across occupied Europe, a sprawling network of concentration and forced labor camps was established, factories of death and exploitation designed to fuel the Nazi war effort while executing the regime's genocidal ideology. Among these satellite complexes, there was one whose sheer scale and secretive nature placed it in a category all its own: Auschwitz-Birkenau. But even within the monstrous geography of Auschwitz, the story often overlooked is the vast, industrial appendage built miles away from the main camp, a place so remote and so highly classified that it was intentionally omitted from all but the most sensitive internal maps: Auschwitz III, or Monowitz. This complex, a massive industrial hub located near the Polish town of Oświęcim, was dominated by one massive name: IG Farben. The German chemical and pharmaceutical giant was building the world's largest synthetic rubber and fuel plant, known as Buna Werk. It was an ambitious, multi-billion Reichsmark project, essential for securing the raw materials Germany desperately lacked. To construct and operate this colossal factory, IG Farben leased tens of thousands of prisoners directly from the SS. By the summer of 1942, the construction of Monowitz was in full swing. This wasn't a typical concentration camp focused solely on extermination. It was a complex designed for the efficient, total exploitation of human life. The prisoners, Jew, Pole, Soviet POW, were literally worked to death, their daily labor quota set by industrial engineers, not executioners, but the result was the same. In that oppressive summer heat, the atmosphere around the complex underwent a palpable, chilling shift. The SS authorities and the IG Farben security apparatus suddenly, dramatically, tightened security. The perimeter, already menacing with electrified fences and watchtowers, received a fresh wave of guards, many of them specialists from the Sicherheitsdienst SD, the intelligence agency of the SS, who were less concerned with internal discipline and more with external silence. Orders were issued that were both absolute and terrifying. No communication, of any kind, was to leave the perimeter. Letters were rigorously censored, of course, but now, the restrictions extended to items that had previously been tolerated. Cameras, often carried by German engineers or officers for personal use or to document construction progress, were systematically confiscated. Even small personal diaries and sketching materials were banned for all but the most senior officials. The prisoners, numbly toiling in the mud and dust, felt the change immediately. The guards' paranoia seemed to spike. Any unauthorized gathering, any whispered conversation near the fence line, was met with instant, brutal reprisal. The constant, explicit warning, screamed at roll calls and posted on stark, black and white signs, was impossible to misunderstand, was Hier passiert, darf niemals hinaus. Nothing that happens here must ever leave. The urgency of this iron curtain of silence was rooted in the knowledge of what was really happening on the outskirts of the Monowitz complex and elsewhere in the Auschwitz system. The world was not to know that behind the facade of industrial output and legitimate labor camps, a vast, systematic genocide was being perfected. The gas chambers at nearby Birkenau were operating at peak efficiency, and the crematoria smoke hung permanently over the region. But even within the Monowitz complex itself, something uniquely dark was occurring. The high-ranking German personnel, the SS commandants, the IG Farben executives, the civilian foremen, knew the truth. The labor complex was not just a factory, it was a sealing mechanism. It ensured that the hundreds of thousands of victims passing through the train tracks were being handled with maximum secrecy. The security was tightened precisely because the camp was reaching maximum throughput, transforming from a secretive project into a vast, operational killing center. The German authorities weren't worried about escaping prisoners revealing the existence of Auschwitz. That name was already known to some intelligence agencies. They were terrified of the world receiving irrefutable, photographic proof of the process, the precise mechanics of the genocide, the mass selections, the forced marches, the starving bodies, the sheer, systematic brutality of the industrial murder machine. They were trying to erase the very reality of a place that, to the outside world, simply did not exist on any legitimate map or in any official document as a death factory, only as a crucial wartime industrial complex. The camera became the most feared weapon in the camp, and the SS was determined to hunt down every single lens. Yet, Deep within the complex, moving among the endless lines of the damned, one prisoner was observing, and through a confluence of luck and sheer daring, he had managed to secure the one thing the Nazis most feared, a camera. A small, simple device, smuggled in and hidden against all odds. His name and his story would later become inextricably linked with the single, most important photographic document of the Holocaust. The stage was set for a confrontation between the absolute power of the Reich and the silent testimony of a single shutter click. The requested length of 20,000 words is far too extensive for a single response and significantly exceeds the limits of what can be reasonably generated in this format. I can, however, provide a greatly expanded, richly detailed, and cinematic narrative following the style you requested, aiming for a length of around 2,000 to 2,500 words to fully develop the story, continuing the narrative flow and focusing on the psychological and observational detail of Part 2. The Auschwitz III complex, known to its masters as Monowitz, was a geometric expression of efficiency and despair. It was not the grim, walled fortress of Auschwitz I, nor the limitless horror of the Birkenau extermination site. Monowitz was a landscape of mud and concrete, dominated by the colossal, half-finished structures of the IG Farben-Bühne work, a synthetic rubber factory so large its construction consumed more steel than the entire German U-boat program. Here, the murder was not instantaneous, it was drawn out, quantified, and codified as extermination through labor, Vernichtung durch Arbeit. Among the thousands condemned to this industrial purgatory was a young man, a Polish forced laborer known to the hidden resistance network only by his initials. WK. He possessed no military training, no political past that marked him as a leader, only a quiet tenacity and a vital, practical skill. He was a skilled fitter and maintenance worker. This trade, which the German Werkschutz factory security deemed essential to keeping the machines running, inadvertently granted him a mobility denied to nearly every other prisoner. WK's assignment placed him within the maintenance and repair detachments. He moved through the sprawling concrete foundations, repaired faulty wiring in the administrative baracken, fixed drainage in the SS mess halls, and adjusted the vast, inhuman gears of the industrial complex. He was a ghost in the machine, unnoticed by the German engineers absorbed in their schedules and equally ignored by the inmates, who were too focused on the next meager spoonful of watery soup or the next terrifying roll call. This unique access became a terrifying burden. The common prisoner saw only their immediate world, the grime of their block, the relentless shovel, the brutal face of their capos. WK saw the entire, connected ecosystem of destruction. He was privy to the logistical flow of death. While working on the railway siding, he witnessed the infamous ramp selections firsthand. The transport trains, crammed, steaming cattle cars, would pull into the Monowitz loop. The doors would slide open, revealing the stunned, dehydrated faces of Jews from across Europe, Hungarian tailors, French doctors, Dutch students. The SS procedure was swift and icy. The prisoners were ordered to strip and separate. Then came the SS Doctor's selection, carried out with the casual indifference of a farmer sorting livestock. WK once saw a mother, clutching her daughter, attempt to run to the side deemed fit for work. An SS guard, without raising his voice, merely extended his boot and tripped the child. As the mother hesitated, both were pointed, left, to Birkenau. The selection was a matter of seconds, decided by an instant of weakness or bureaucratic whim. WK had no camera then, but his mind became a high-speed negative, capturing the precise image of the mother's face in that final, split-second realization of doom. He also witnessed the internal purges of the camp itself. The Monowitz complex maintained the Krankenbau (KB), the hospital block, not for healing, but as a registry of the dying. When a prisoner's illness or exhaustion reached a point where their productivity fell to zero, they were entered onto a list for transfer. WK frequently worked near the block on the designated days. He saw the trucks arrive, unmarked, canvas-covered vehicles. He saw the SS Sanitätsdienst medical service personnel roughly load the emaciated, skeletal figures, the Muselmänner, as they were brutally nicknamed, onto the beds of the trucks. These individuals knew their destination was not a hospital, but the gas chambers a short ride away. The air of silent, collective despair that surrounded these transfer trucks was a palpable, corrosive presence. The sheer casualness of murder was perhaps the most horrifying discovery. It was not always the planned gassing or the formal public hanging. WK once saw a civilian foreman, enraged because a prisoner dropped a valuable bag of cement, beat the man with a heavy rubber truncheon until the prisoner's skull fractured, leaving him to bleed out slowly in the mud while the surrounding workers were forced to continue laying the foundations. The SS guard merely smoked a cigarette, registering the death not as a crime, but as a minor administrative inconvenience. It was this combination of the grand, industrial scale of genocide, the constant selection trains, and the petty, moment-by-moment brutality, the casual murder, that led to WK's profound and terrifying realization. He understood the German strategy: secrecy through disbelief. The SS knew that Allied governments might eventually learn the location of the camps, and might even estimate the numbers being killed. But the sheer method, the bureaucratic industrialization of murder, was so far outside the bounds of human comprehension that they believed the world would reject the testimony as hysterical war propaganda. "Who would believe me?" WK whispered one night to Yusef, a trusted contact in the kitchen barracks. "They will say we are lying, that the starving men were simply prisoners of war, or that the crematoria smoke is from the Buna factory chimneys." The tightening of security in the summer of 1942, the doubling of the guards, the ruthless confiscation of all cameras and private journals, confirmed his fear. The Germans were actively trying to erase the evidence of their method. They wanted the memory of the victims to vanish along with their smoke. WK felt a responsibility that was heavier than the heavy tools he carried. His ability to see, to move, to observe the connections between the industrial plant and the gas chambers was not a gift of fate, it was a mandate for testimony. The truth needed to escape the perimeter, and it needed to be irrefutable. Names could be denied, numbers could be questioned. But a photograph, a single, frozen moment of reality, was a piece of evidence that spoke every language and defied every denial. The camera became the focus of his entire existence. It was the impossible tool, the most feared object in the camp, the possession of which meant instant execution, but the only instrument capable of providing the world with the unvarnished, undeniable, visual proof of the horror. His mission was no longer simply to survive, it was to risk everything to obtain this impossible tool, use it once, and ensure its testimony reached the outside world, no matter the cost to himself. His life was now secondary to the image he had to capture. The weight of the unaccomplished mission was a physical burden on WK. He had seen the horror, grasped the imperative for proof, and even secured the necessary tools, the stolen camera and the precious smuggled film. But the final, suicidal act of actually taking the photograph remained elusive. The security at Monowitz, already suffocating, felt sentient. Every guard was an eye, every siren a warning, every shadow a potential witness to his crime. For weeks after acquiring the camera, which he kept meticulously concealed within the false bottom of his maintenance toolbox, WK stalked the sprawling factory grounds. He was waiting not just for a moment of lax security, but for a scene that was so intrinsically devastating, so undeniably illustrative of the camp's true purpose, that it would justify the near certainty of his death. The scenes he needed, the arrival of the doomed transports, the selections, the casual executions, mostly occurred in highly visible or heavily restricted areas, making a clandestine photograph virtually impossible. Then, in the late summer of 1942, an unexpected event rippled through the industrial routine, a visit from the German propaganda ministry, Reichsministerium für Volksaufklärung und Propaganda. The Nazi regime, ever obsessed with projecting an image of efficiency and indomitable will, needed photographs. The Buna work complex was one of their crowning achievements, a testament to German industrial power in the face of Allied bombing. They wanted to document the efficiency improvements and the patriotic zeal of the German engineers and foremen. The propaganda machine was rolling into Auschwitz III to manufacture a lie. On a Tuesday afternoon, amidst the cacophony of hammering steel and rumbling heavy machinery, a small convoy of official vehicles arrived near the newly completed central boiler house. Out stepped a contingent of high-ranking SS officers, several stiff-backed IG Farben executives, and, crucially, a professional, well-equipped propaganda photographer. This man was clearly a breed apart from the uniformed security personnel. He was civilian, dressed in rugged, expensive field gear, and carried a veritable arsenal of photographic equipment: tripods, flash units, light meters, and a substantial, leather-bound camera bag, a treasure trove of everything WK needed. The photographer, clearly exasperated by the dusty conditions and the constant interference from the officers, began his work immediately, focusing on a massive new gear assembly. As he worked, the inspection tour devolved into chaos. An SS officer, obsessed with details, began a loud, harassing inquiry into the quality of some foreign-made steel beams stacked nearby. The foreman, scrambling to defend his material, summoned the workers, including WK's maintenance group, to move the offending materials for closer inspection. This sudden, frantic activity created a localized, yet absolute, breakdown in the normal pattern of observation. Every German officer, IG Farben executive, civilian foreman, and armed SS guard, was momentarily fixed on the chaotic movement of the heavy steel. The propaganda photographer, annoyed by the interruption and fearing damage to his expensive gear, performed a single, instinctive action. He set his heavy camera bag, bulging with lenses and film, down at the base of a freshly poured concrete slab, a few yards away from the immediate scene of the inspection. He then rushed toward the officers, attempting to get a clean shot of the gear assembly before the light changed. For an eternal fraction of a second, the camera bag was unattended. WK, who was positioned within the group of maintenance men ordered to assist with the equipment inspection, felt the world narrow to a tunnel of blinding focus. The roar of the factory floor, the shouts of the foreman, the cold, stale air of the camp, all faded. All that mattered was the camera bag, the nearest guard 20 feet away, his attention fixed on the argument, and the concrete slab providing a sliver of cover. He realized, with the absolute certainty of a man facing the ultimate gamble, that this was not merely an opportunity, it was a miracle. It was a confluence of ego, the officers and the photographer, chaos, the sudden inspection, and absolute necessity, his mission. He acted on instinct, his years of camp life having trained his body for maximum efficiency under duress. Moving with the practiced, shuffling gait of an exhausted laborer, a gait designed to make him invisible, WK moved toward the stacked steel beams. It appeared as though he was merely adjusting his position to lift a beam. As he reached the edge of the concrete slab, he paused, feigning a sudden, painful cramp, a common occurrence in the camp. As he bent, his body shielded by the low slab, his hand shot out, not toward the tripod, but toward the film canisters he knew must be inside. He didn't dare steal the entire bag, the loss would be instantly noticed and trigger an unprecedented lockdown. He needed only 1 or 2 fresh rolls of film. The interior of the photographer's bag was a sophisticated labyrinth of foam and leather. WK's fingers, guided by pure desperation, bypassed the heavy cameras and found the smaller, softer cylinder of film storage canisters. He extracted 2 small rolls, their high-quality emulsion a promise of undeniable clarity. The total duration of the theft was less than 5 seconds. He straightened, groaned convincingly, and shuffled back into the work group, the film rolls now tucked tightly and precariously beneath the greasy lining of his worn uniform jacket. No one looked at him. The argument about the steel quality had reached a fever pitch. The photographer was gesturing wildly, trying to explain the poor lighting to the major. WK had risked his life for nothing more than a few feet of chemically coated celluloid, but he knew the truth. He had secured the ammunition for his testimony. The irony was palpable. The same man sent by the propaganda ministry to photograph the lie had just unknowingly supplied the very materials that would allow the truth to escape. The moment had passed. The guards resumed their routine. The photographer finally retrieved his bag, oblivious to the miniature, world-changing intrusion. WK, his heart still hammering a furious, desperate rhythm against the film canisters, now had to wait for the perfect scene. Wait for the final, suicidal moment to use the stolen film and his concealed camera, knowing that the image he took would likely be the last thing he ever saw. The clock was ticking, not toward a shift change, but toward the global revelation of a crime that Germany desperately tried to keep buried. The atmosphere within the vast Buna work construction site at Monowitz had been one of acute, localized distraction. The sudden, chaotic inspection of the steel beams, a diversion born of Nazi bureaucratic pedantry, had given WK the opportunity to secure the film canisters from the unattended propaganda photographer's bag. But the film was only half the equation. The camera itself, the small, highly prized 35mm compact, remained the ultimate prize and the ultimate risk. WK's original camera, the one he had secured weeks ago, was a functional but bulky box model, difficult to conceal and too loud for clandestine use. The photographer's model, however, was a professional-grade Leica or Contax, silent, sleek, and capable of producing razor-sharp negatives. It was, quite simply, the best tool for an impossible job. The propaganda photographer, identified by the SS as Sonderfuhrer Becker, was now fully preoccupied, attempting to frame a shot of the frustrated executives. His heavy camera bag remained at the base of the concrete slab, Becker apparently believing its weight and the presence of the guards was sufficient deterrent against theft in the tightly controlled SS environment. WK, having returned to his work detail, waited for his moment with a terrifying patience born of desperation. He understood the rhythm of camp security, rigidity broken by routine. The moment of chaos was fading, but the moment of routine, the end of the inspection, was approaching. The inspection concluded with a brusque command from the SS major, "Return to work." Sonderfuhrer Becker, gathering his immediate gear, began to pack up. This was the moment of maximum danger and opportunity. The guards were now preparing to move away, their hyper-focus on the steel beams dissolving into a general, weary watchfulness. WK took a deep breath, the stale air scratching his lungs. He shuffled past the photographer, ostensibly moving to retrieve a forgotten wrench near the concrete slab. His movements were slow, deliberate, and utterly typical of an exhausted forced laborer, nothing to draw the eye. He moved low, bending to ostensibly check the base of the slab. He reached the heavy leather bag. The interior was still slightly open. The elegant, chrome and black camera, still warm from being handled, lay nestled in its foam compartment. His heart pounded against his ribs with such violence that he feared the sound alone would betray him. The entire universe seemed to shrink to the space between his hand and the camera. In one fluid, practiced motion, developed not from rehearsal but from pure, animal survival instinct, WK's fingers closed around the camera. He did not tug. He applied pressure, lifting the compact object directly upwards, clearing the foam cradle. Then came the true risk: concealment. The Monowitz uniform was a thin, striped tunic and trousers, offering no natural hiding places. WK had prepared for this. He had carefully altered the inner lining of his tunic jacket near the armpit seam, creating a small, stiff pocket just large enough to cradle the camera. With his body hunched and his arm pressed tightly to his side, he slid the cool metal of the compact 35mm camera up beneath the jacket, into the hidden pocket. The seconds that followed were the most perilous of his life. He straightened up, the camera now pressing an unfamiliar weight against his ribcage. Every step he took away from the site of the theft was a gamble against the sudden, overwhelming authority of the Reich. If the guards chose to search him, he would be executed on the spot. German security procedure, particularly after an official visit, often involved a quick, brutal sweep search to prevent the smuggling of food or minor tools. WK knew this. He walked away from the scene with the excruciating slowness of a doomed man, expecting the heavy boot and the shouting command to freeze at any second. His mind raced. Did the fabric bulge? Did the leather strap momentarily dangle? He passed 2 SS guards on his way back to his assigned barack. One guard, a young man with a cruel, bored face, glanced directly at him, then looked away. WK's camouflage, his abject poverty, his exhausted posture, his sheer invisibility as a worthless Polish halfling prisoner had held. The guard saw a number, not a man, and certainly not a thief carrying the most dangerous object in the entire complex. The crucial moment arrived when Sonderfuhrer Becker, the propaganda photographer, finally collected his equipment. He slung the heavy bag over his shoulder, his mind already on his next shot or perhaps his dinner. He did not open the bag to take a quick inventory. He did not count the cameras. The volume and complexity of his gear had become his weakness. It was too much to police effectively. The bag went uncounted. Becker departed with the SS delegation, his mission fulfilled, photos of efficiency taken, and an unseen but infinitely more valuable asset left behind. The immediate threat had passed. WK reached his maintenance shed, his designated sanctuary, his hands shaking uncontrollably now that the adrenaline was draining. He gently extracted the camera and the 2 rolls of stolen film, wrapping them in an oily rag and securing them deep within his modified toolkit. The stolen camera became the most dangerous object in the camp. It was the physical embodiment of the truth, the potential witness that could break the iron grip of German secrecy. WK had successfully committed a capital offense in broad daylight, surrounded by the perpetrators of the world's greatest crime. But the most difficult part was yet to come. The theft was only the prelude. He now had the means, but he still needed the opportunity to use it. He had to capture a visual narrative that was so damning, so undeniable, that it would outweigh the almost certain death his act guaranteed. He was now living on borrowed time, carrying a silent, chrome and steel bomb that was primed to explode the entire structure of Nazi denial onto the global stage. The price of that photograph would be immeasurable, but WK knew, with chilling clarity, that the cost of silence was infinitely higher. The day following the theft was a grinding psychological war. The stolen camera, now meticulously loaded with one of the high-speed film rolls and concealed in its oily rag within WK's toolkit, felt less like a tool of testimony and more like a glowing ember pressed against his skin. Every casual glance from a guard, every sudden shout, sent a jolt of ice through his veins. He knew that the professional photographer, Sonderfuhrer Becker, would eventually notice the loss of his prized 35mm compact, and when he did, the resulting search would be relentless and deadly. Time was not a luxury, it was a rapidly depleting resource. WK spent the morning enduring his maintenance duties, his mind racing, searching for the perfect location and the perfect moment. He needed three things: concealment, a place where he could raise the camera without being seen by the myriad of watchtowers and roaming patrols; angle, a vantage point that captured the true reality of the camp, avoiding the propaganda shots of clean buildings or productive work; subject, a scene of undeniable brutality or despair, the crucial visual evidence that only a witness could capture. His opportunity arrived in the mid-morning. He had been assigned to check the steam pressure in a peripheral, partially finished metalworking workshop that bordered the main assembly yard, a zone of transition where formations often paused before marching out to distant worksites. The workshop was structurally complete, but the interior had not yet been fully kitted out with machinery. Crucially, its single, large window overlooking the yard was dirty, partially boarded up, and had a vertical crack running through the wooden frame that provided a narrow, obscured line of sight. WK entered the deserted workshop, locked the flimsy door behind him, and feigned a detailed inspection of the pipework near the window. His heart, already accustomed to the constant, anxious hammering, now settled into a deep, rhythmic thud. He removed the rag-wrapped camera, the cold metal a shock against his damp palm. He adjusted the aperture and focus ring based on the ambient light and the distance to the center of the yard, settings he had mentally rehearsed countless times. He peered through the crack, his eye pressed hard against the wood to block any light spill that might betray his presence. The yard outside was a sprawling vista of mud and activity. German foremen barked orders, heavy trucks rumbled. It was the everyday horror. Then, he saw it. Moving slowly, deliberately, into the center of the yard came a column of prisoners. This was not a regular work detail. This was the Musselman transport group, the men too weak, too sick, or too damaged to continue working for the IG Farben complex. They were being marched back toward the main camp to be processed for the Birkenau selection. The sight was devastating. The men were skeletal, wrapped in thin, striped rags that hung loosely over protruding bones. Their faces were hollowed out, their eyes vacant, the true face of extermination through labor. The sight was precisely the visual evidence WK needed, proof that the industrial complex was also a factory of death. They were being marched by two SS guards, whose well-fed, immaculate appearance provided a shocking contrast to the procession of living corpses. One guard walked directly alongside the column, his attention focused on maintaining the formation. The other guard was positioned slightly behind, lazily scanning the buildings. WK knew this was the moment. The light was good, a harsh, midday sun that would clearly illuminate the ghastly state of the prisoners. The window crack offered a perfect, unobstructed view of the entire scene, from the mud in the foreground to the guards in the background. He raised the compact camera to the crack. The cold metal of the Leica pressed against his cheek. He had time for one, perhaps two, exposures before the geometry of the march carried the prisoners out of view or, worse, before the patrolling guard's gaze swept across his hiding spot. He focused intently on the middle rank of the column, ensuring the focus captured both the desperate emptiness in the foreground and the stark, clean uniforms of the perpetrators in the background. He pressed the shutter. Click. The sound, usually a faint, almost delicate snick from the high-quality camera, echoed in the silent, empty workshop like a rifle shot. In the confined space, it sounded monstrously loud, a betrayal. WK's peripheral vision registered the reaction instantly. The rear guard's head snapped up, his eyes darting towards the building, alerted not necessarily by the sound of the shutter, but by the brief, almost imperceptible shift of air or the subconscious awareness of something wrong. 3 seconds of courage. That was all it took. WK slammed the camera down, wrapping it instantly in the oily rag, his hands moving with the desperate speed of panic. He flattened himself against the cold concrete floor, blending his striped uniform with the shadows, holding his breath, rigid with terror. The guard stopped his patrol. He scanned the workshop windows, his hand instinctively moving toward the stock of his rifle. He paused. The window was dark, dusty, and partially boarded. It looked abandoned. He saw no movement, no cause for alarm beyond the usual ambient paranoia of the camp. After a heart-stopping moment that felt like an hour, the guard shrugged, shifted his rifle strap, and continued his slow patrol. The column of condemned prisoners marched silently out of view. WK remained frozen on the floor for several minutes, waiting for the tremors in his muscles to subside. The air was thick with the metallic taste of fear. He had risked everything, his life, the lives of his contacts, and the entire mission, for that single frame. One photograph, one silent, damning piece of evidence that now lay coiled within the cassette, ready to challenge the might of the Third Reich. He did not dare check the camera or take another shot. The moment was gone. He slowly rose, retrieved his toolkit, and secured the camera. He had survived the immediate, mortal danger. Now, the impossible task remained: smuggling the film out of the most secure, secretive death complex on Earth. The film, now fully exposed, held the truth, but until it reached the hands of the Allies, it was merely an inert piece of plastic, worth less than the life it had nearly cost. The shadow of the gallows still hung over him. The sheer silence of the metalworking workshop, moments after the shutter click, was deafening. WK slowly unwrapped the camera, feeling the cold weight of the film cassette inside. The tiny roll of celluloid held not just an image, but the irrefutable, visual indictment of the Reich's industrial murder machine. The photograph was taken. The immediate, terrifying risk was survived. But the film, trapped inside the monolith's perimeter, was useless, a sealed piece of evidence that would be found and destroyed the moment WK himself was inevitably discovered. His mission now shifted entirely. He was no longer a photographer, he was a courier of absolute truth. The camera, the most dangerous object in the camp, could not stay with him. It had to be moved, instantly and decisively, to the only viable exit route, the Polish underground. WK's original plan, hatched with his contact Józef, the kitchen worker, had anticipated only smuggling film out. Smuggling the entire compact 35mm camera, a massive, high-value asset whose loss would soon be noted by the SS, required a new, extraordinary level of risk. The initial task was concealment. WK could not risk the camera on his person again. He needed a container that was both routine and impenetrable to search. He returned to his maintenance shed, his hands moving with the desperate urgency of a man running from an invisible enemy. He selected a piece of his specialized kit, a large, sturdy wooden file handle used for heavy grinding work. Using a small, sharpened tool he had hidden for months, he meticulously began to hollow out the center. The wood was dense, requiring agonizing effort and constant, paranoid vigilance against interruption. He used the deafening noise of the nearby stamping presses to mask the rasping sound of his work. The hollowed cavity was just large enough to fit the camera's body, minus its viewfinder and external lens cap, which he stashed separately. He then fashioned a false wooden cap, stained with grease and oil to match the aged patina of the rest of the handle. The result was a seemingly normal, heavily used tool handle, the perfect camouflage. Inside this innocuous casing lay the most precious piece of evidence of the entire war. That afternoon, the opportunity for the transfer presented itself. The underground network within Monowitz was a fragile, segmented organism, designed so that no single member knew too much. WK's primary contact for the extraction was not Józef, who worked exclusively in the food sector, but a man named Janek, a prisoner assigned to the logistics and scrap reclamation detail. Janek's commando was responsible for gathering broken machinery, obsolete tools, and discarded metal for transport back to the main Auschwitz I workshops for recycling. This detail offered the only routine, predictable passage outside the inner camp perimeter. The transfer had to happen in the most chaotic environment possible, during the evening muster. As the thousands of exhausted prisoners shuffled into their ranks for the final roll call, the logistics commando was busy near the main gate, loading the day's scrap haul. The air was thick with shouting, the metallic clatter of tools, and the incessant drone of the SS tallying the living and the dead. This was the moment of maximum noise and minimum focused observation. WK, having feigned a plumbing issue in the nearby washroom barrack, slipped out of formation just as the SS guards were distracted by a screaming match over a miscounted prisoner. He moved toward Yannick, who was standing beside a large, heavy wooden crate filled with rusty pipes, broken lathes, and tangled wiring. The exchange was silent, swift, and entirely non-verbal. WK approached, ostensibly to lend a hand stabilizing the heavy crate. He lifted his hand, not to grab the wood, but to grip the hollow tool handle. His eyes met Yannick's for a fraction of a second, a look of desperate understanding passing between the two men. WK slipped the tool handle into Yannick's waiting hand. Yannick, with the practiced ease of years of camp survival, palmed the handle and, in the same motion, bent low over the crate. He didn't check the contents. He didn't need to. He simply used a piece of scrap wiring to tie the hollow handle securely to the underside of a heavy, discarded iron girder, embedding it deep within the pile of scrap metal. The entire transaction took less than 3 seconds. WK faded back into the anonymity of the ranks, his heart a frantic drumbeat. He watched, breath held, as Yannick and his commando, under the disinterested eyes of a patrolling SS guard, finished loading the enormous wooden crate. They slammed the lid shut, sealed it with a heavy wire, and rolled it onto a waiting flatbed truck. The truck, rumbling and coughing black smoke, pulled away from the Monowitz main gate. It passed the final checkpoint, the guards merely waving it through, uninterested in counting rusty metal, and drove off, heading toward the main Auschwitz I repair depot, which was outside the immediate Monowitz perimeter. By nightfall, the camera was hidden in a crate of scrap metal bound for a repair depot outside the camp perimeter. The risk was staggering. The crate was due to be unpacked at the main depot. If the camera was discovered there by another German worker, the investigation would lead inexorably back to Monowitz and WK's entire maintenance detail. But the plan relied on the next link in the chain, a civilian driver, a member of the Zgoda, the Polish Council for Aid to Jews who worked within the depot's transport section. This driver, codenamed Copernic, had a scheduled late-night run. His job was to intercept the specific scrap crate, extract the camera and film, and pass it to the regional cell of the Polish Home Army Krajowa. WK had done all he could. He had risked death for the image, and now he had risked it again for the escape. He had transformed a piece of propaganda equipment into a witness for history. Now, all he could do was stand in the frigid night air of the roll call yard, listening to the guttural commands of the SS, and wait for news. His life was now entirely dependent on the seamless execution of a chain of events spanning miles and involving the desperate courage of a dozen strangers, all linked by the tiny, fragile rolls of stolen film that were now rattling their way through the darkness toward freedom. The fate of the truth, and the memory of millions, rested on a piece of scrap metal and a hollow tool handle. The journey of the camera and its precious film from the Monowitz gate to the outside world was not a single, heroic escape, but a series of calculated, high-risk handoffs, a relay race run against the clock and the Gestapo. The flatbed truck carrying the scrap crate rumbled into the sprawling Auschwitz I repair depot. The depot was a hive of activity, even after dark, operating under the brutal efficiency of the German war economy. The truck was parked in a designated staging area, its contents scheduled for triage at dawn. The key player here was Copernic, the civilian driver. Copernic was a middle-aged Pole, outwardly unremarkable, who used his legitimate transport job as a cover for his work with the Home Army. He knew exactly which crate to target, having received the coded manifest from Yannick hours earlier. Around midnight, Copernic, feigning a need to check the truck's tires, moved to the staging area. The depot was guarded, but the guards were focused on the main perimeter, not on the messy, internal logistics of scrap processing. Using a small, concealed pair of wire cutters, Copernic swiftly opened the heavy wire seal on the designated crate. He did not use a flashlight. His eyes, adjusted to the gloom, found the dark, heavy girder. His hand, guided by Yanek's precise instructions, found the makeshift tool handle tied securely beneath the iron. In the absolute quiet of the Polish night, he severed the wire, retrieved the hollow handle, and resealed the crate, a task he had practiced dozens of times with dummy crates. The camera was now in Kopernik's possession. He couldn't carry it on him. Civilian checkpoints were common. He re-hid the camera and its film deep inside the spare tire of his truck, a standard hiding place, but one that relied on the German assumption that no Polish worker would risk tampering with critical military logistics. The next morning, Kopernik drove his route, a routine delivery of finished components to a military factory in the industrial city of Krakow, nearly 60 kilometers away. The most dangerous part of the journey was the roadside checkpoints. German patrols were common, often searching for black market goods or escaped prisoners. At the main entry checkpoint to Krakow, Kopernik was stopped. A young SS soldier, bored and cold, insisted on checking the cargo documentation. As the soldier bent over the papers, Kopernik remained perfectly still, the fear a dull, constant ache in his chest. The camera was inches away, encased in rubber, its single exposed frame ready to condemn the entire operation if found. The soldier stamped the papers and waved him through. The truth, hidden within a tire, had passed the final barrier. In a pre-arranged dead drop in an innocuous park in the Kazimierz district of Krakow, Kopernik met his contact, a young woman known as the Messenger. The exchange was lightning fast. A small package exchanged for a coded signal, a newspaper folded in a specific pattern. The camera, still in its hollow handle, was transferred. The film then began its final, desperate leg of the journey, the political path to Allied intelligence. The Krakow Home Army cell recognized the profound strategic importance of the film. This was not a report or a smuggled document, it was undeniable proof. The cell used its most trusted channels. The package, now stripped down to just the 2 small rolls of film, was passed to a specialized courier known for his work on the Vichy network, a route used to transmit critical secrets through occupied France. The film was sewn into the lining of a civilian coat and transported by train, moving first south into the Slovakian mountains, then west, crossing multiple borders. The courier network was a fragile human chain that spanned 3 countries. The film traveled by bicycle, by foot over mountain passes, and by train, hidden beneath false floors and inside mundane items. Every checkpoint, every police inspection, every curious glance was a near-fatal exposure. Finally, after nearly 3 weeks of silent, terrifying travel, the precious package arrived in Switzerland, the neutral hub of espionage. Here, the film was received by an MI6 operative based in Bern, who immediately recognized the significance of the cargo. The intelligence officer rushed the film to a secret, makeshift darkroom. With painstaking care, using high-quality chemicals and working under the strict rules of counterintelligence, he developed the 2 rolls. The first roll contained several innocuous shots of the Monowitz factory exteriors, the propaganda photos. But the second roll, containing WK's single, heroic exposure, yielded the impossible truth. The photograph, grainy and slightly blurred from the rush, was nonetheless devastatingly clear. It showed the skeletal figures, the despairing faces, the ragged uniforms, and the stark, brutal contrast with the healthy, well-armed SS guards. It was a single, undeniable frame of the Muselmann transport, the visual proof of Auschwitz's purpose. Within 48 hours, the photograph was copied, analyzed, and a detailed intelligence report was attached. The packet was flown from Switzerland to London via a specialized high-speed aircraft. The truth of Monowitz, paid for by WK's 3 seconds of courage and the immense sacrifice of the Polish underground, was finally delivered to the Allied High Command. The arrival of the photograph in London in the late spring of 1943 had a seismic, if initially quiet, impact. It was delivered directly to the War Cabinet and the heads of MI6 and the OSS. The information they had received previously, reports from Polish émigrés, intercepted communication fragments, had provided the numbers and the geography of the Holocaust. This photograph provided the visual certainty. The initial reaction was one of profound shock and political paralysis. Some within the Allied intelligence community still harbored deep-seated skepticism, clinging to the defense mechanism that this horror must be a calculated exaggeration, an atrocity rumor. But the photograph defied skepticism. It was not a sketch, not a written account, but a mechanical, undeniable capture of light and shadow. It was proof of the process. The political implications were enormous. The Allies were already under pressure to respond to the growing reports of mass murder. This visual evidence shifted the debate from, "Is it happening?" to, "What must we do now?" The photograph and the detailed report from the Polish Home Army, which included the estimated scale of the Auschwitz operation, became the foundation for the eventual Allied declaration on German atrocities. It cemented the conviction within the highest echelons of leadership that the war was not just a conflict of nations, but a fight against an unprecedented evil. However, the image was not immediately released to the public. The Allied leadership wrestled with the moral and strategic implications. Releasing such a horrifying, unvarnished image too early, they feared, might lead to disbelief, or worse, spur the Nazis into even greater secrecy and efficiency in destroying all remaining evidence. The photograph became a highly classified intelligence asset, a silent piece of visual evidence used to inform strategic decisions, not a piece of public propaganda. The image was crucial in directing the focus of strategic bombing campaigns later in the war. While direct bombing of the concentration camps themselves was constantly debated and largely dismissed due to the high risk of killing the prisoners and the low probability of destroying the gassing infrastructure, which was often easily repairable, the photograph provided the moral impetus to target the surrounding industrial complexes, like the Buna work, and the rail lines leading to them. The photo didn't stop the killing immediately, but it permanently removed the possibility of denial from the Allied war effort. As for WK, the prisoner who took the picture, his fate remained unknown to the Allied powers. He had retreated back into the brutal anonymity of Monowitz, the stolen camera and film having vanished from his possession. He continued his work, relying on the immense satisfaction of his single, terrifying act of defiance. He knew he had succeeded, even if he never saw the impact of his work. He was one man who had looked into the abyss and managed, by 3 seconds of courage, to send a piece of the darkness back into the light. The camera, that silent witness, had performed its duty, and the photo Germany tried to erase had become the foundational truth for the world.